Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Will the man who saved the euro and brought stability to Italy's political landscape step down as Prime Minister and try to become President? The Italian public, it would seem, would prefer Mario Draghi to run the country until the end of next year and oversee the pandemic recovery. But he appears keen on becoming head of state. And to make matters particularly interesting with the political right getting stronger, Silvio Berlusconi could well make a bid for the presidency too. It's very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. You know, it was less than a year ago that Mario Draghi was nominated to run an Italian national unity government to save the country from an economic and health crisis. The last government had collapsed as it couldn't agree how to spend billions of euros from the European Union. Well, that money came with conditions. Italy had to reform its economy, its judicial system, and cut bureaucracy. Well, Draghi's pushed through some of those reforms, and European capitals would like Draghi to take on the presidency and hold the future Italian government accountable for the way it spends its money. But with the rise of populist parties, the country's rising debt, and a fractious relationship with Brussels, the very future of the EU could be in jeopardy. Well, while there are no official candidates, here are some of the top contenders in line for the 7-year mandate as Italian president. As mentioned, Mario Draghi, Prime Minister of Italy since February of 2021. There is also, as mentioned, the disgraced former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, who led 3 governments between 1994 and 2011. It's also worth mentioning Pier Ferdinando Casini, the former Christian Democrat president of the Chamber of Deputies, and Paolo Gentiloni, former head of government and current European Commissioner for the Economy. I'm very pleased to be able to say that we can welcome back to this particular round table Lorenzo Codogno, visiting professor at the London School of Economics. He was formerly chief economist at the Italian Treasury. We say hello to Selena Grimaldi. She's in Verona in Italy, assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Padua. And in London, we see Brunello Rosa, chief exec of Rosa and Rubini Associates, visiting professor at Bocconi University. Lorenzo, let me come to you first of all, since you are principally a money man. Was I right to suggest at the top of the program that Mario Draghi, as the head of the European Central Bank, actually saved the euro?
Well, I think he did a good job, and certainly he managed to navigate a very difficult political environment in Europe over a number of years, which probably qualified him to lead a very difficult coalition in Italy and achieve some results, because we have to acknowledge that over the past year he was able to achieve some results, although still incomplete, although still not conclusive, but certainly at least some steps in the right direction.
And was it his economic know-how that allowed Italy, after such a terrible period at the end of 2020, to be voted Country of the Year by The Economist?
Well, I think a combination. I think the pandemic hit hard initially Italy, but then Italy managed to address the issue reasonably well. Particularly, this government did a good job in terms of speeding up the vaccination campaign and also introduced some restrictions that eventually proved to be correct in supporting the economy on top of public health. So I think overall, the current government did a decent job, and I think this benefited also the economy that, as you know, rebounded sharply following the big contraction in 2020.
Which paves the way very nicely for Italy, which was once, not so very long ago, considered to be undeserving of the European bailout fund, to be in line to get 200 billion euros. So nicely positioned as a country. Selena, why would Mario Draghi, having done such an extraordinary job and commanding what I think 63% approval rating with the Italian public, why would he want to quit the job of Prime Minister when he doesn't have to?
The problem is that the government coalition, the ruling coalition at the moment, is a fragile coalition. As you know, some parties have threatened to leave the ruling coalition if Draghi drops out, basically, and decides to resign. At this moment, he is the only prime minister capable to maintaining this ruling coalition that is basically a sort of great coalition where there are the center left and the center and the center right in the same government, plus the five-star movement. So it's a very difficult situation. I don't think that it's possible to find an alternative prime minister that is able to maintain this ruling coalition. So,
but if anybody could do it, could he do it if he decided to stay?
I think that probably one solution is that he maintain his role as prime minister and Mattarella basically decide to run for a second term, or at least it can stay in office for a couple of years, 1 year and a half, in order to end this legislature and go to a new election.
Which, with that as a possibility, leaves me wondering, as I put it to you first of all, why he would want to go from the office of Prime Minister, and we'll get into personal ambition a little bit later. Why would he want to quit being Prime Minister to take on the role of Head of State?
Head of State in Italy is an important one. It's not like a ceremonial role. It's not a simply figurehead as in many parliamentary democracies. And this is because the party system is fragile and parties are not able to guarantee often a stable government. So the role of the president increased a lot from the 90s onwards. So basically, this is an important figure, and even other competitors are in a way struggling for this race, for the presidential race.
Okay, okay. So it is quite an
democracy.
important role. It's not just a figurehead. We'll come back onto his personal ambitions a little bit later, if we may. But Brunello, let me bring in, if you like, the ghost at the feast in this, Silvio Berlusconi, sounding out whether he should make a run for the president. Old man, convicted of fraud, former prime minister, disgrace is the word that often comes up when you read about him, known for underage parties, if you like, with young girls, even when he was an old man. What are the chances, A, of him getting through to the second round or the final round of the presidency, and what are the chances perhaps of him becoming president?
I think at this stage the chances are pretty limited. The election of the president is effectively a lottery. We have seen over the decades that even some of the most powerful politicians in Italy, from the Christian Democrats, and you can name Andreotti, Forlani, you can name Fanfani, you can name some of the most important political figures in Italy that really commanded their own parties, didn't manage to get elected presidents, simply because there are always people that in the secret ballot express their somehow dissatisfaction.
Does he have the support of the far right?
He has some support, but you can't take for granted that the entirety of the Lega and the Fratelli d'Italia parliamentary group would support him, simply because they have their own personal agendas, their own personal ambitions. If Berlusconi becomes president, these things may not play out for them as well as they prefer, so they may go for something else.
May I ask you this? Why would he want to put himself forward as a possible candidate? Question number one. And secondly, you say it's a lottery. If he did become president, what would it mean for Italy?
Well, why he wants is pretty clear. Selena said before, the president is a very, very powerful figure in Italy when the parliamentary system is blocked, when the system of parties is fragile, when the political system is fragmented as it currently is. So it becomes a sort of deus ex machina that can effectively create governments out of his will, as we have seen during the Napolitano's presidency, and even in the case of Mattarella's presidency with Draghi at the very least, when he effectively imposed him to parliament. So the reason is because he's a very powerful position. If he becomes president, then I think Italy will go through a not easy period in trying to explain to all his partners how that is possible. You mentioned before the track record, which is not an easy one to explain. And you didn't mention also the various relationships that they had in the past with some of the darkest areas of the country that have been proven judicially. So I think if that becomes reality, there would be some explanations that Italy will have to give to European and transatlantic partners.
Okay, so unlikely. Lorenzo, let me come to you. Do you want to mention any of the other possible candidates for the presidency? Do you want to talk about Cassini or Gentiloni or anybody else?
I think there are many candidates, and certainly the most likely ones are those that are perceived as independent and can actually get support from a broad majority in parliament. So in that regards, I think some of the names you mentioned could be really the front runners, but more than anything else, I think it is time for Italy to have also a female president. And in that sense, I think Cartabia, the former head of the Constitutional Court, now Justice Minister, would be probably the front runner.
Do you want to talk about what happens if Draghi wins the presidency, which means there has to be a new prime minister, which means there are likely to be elections fairly soon after all of that? Do you want to talk about the possibility of the far right making big grounds in those parliamentary elections? I know we're talking about the presidency here, but we're also talking about the future of Italy in general.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, the election of the president is a pretty complex procedure, and I think this time it should involve probably a package deal. In other words, parties should agree to appoint a president, but also should agree to appoint a new prime minister and commit to continue with the current government until the end of the political term. The risk is that once Draghi is elected, the current majority says we no longer support the current government because that was a sort of ad hoc support for the person of Draghi, and Draghi is the only one that can actually bring together so different parties. And we have already seen that Forza Italia, Berlusconi's party, said that they will no longer commit to support any prime minister if it's not Draghi. And that could be for the whole center right. So in other words, the center right might withdraw support from the government, and if there is no center right, there is no central unity government, and that would probably trigger early elections.
So Elena, let me come to you. Draghi's been saying Italy's stability won't be affected if he becomes president. These were some of the very words he put down in stating his personal ambition, or rather lack of it, if you like. I am a man and a grandpa, if you like, at the service of the state. My own destiny does not matter. But can we examine whether Mario Draghi is, in fact, an extremely ambitious man? He's been president of the European Central Bank. He's been prime minister of Italy. He wants to be president. There are some who say he should park that ambition to become president of the European Commission in a couple of years' time? What sort of character is he?
The thing is that Draghi profile undoubtedly matches many of the characteristics that president generally ensure in Italy. Of course, he has a prestigious institutional career, as you mentioned. He had also an executive experience, this one, for example, and at the same time, he has this characteristic that is he has no party profile, and this has always been a big asset in being elected president in Italy. During the First Republic, this means basically to come from a small little party or being an heterodox Christian Democrat, as mentioned before my colleague Rosa. This is one of the things. Ciampi was also an independent governor of the Bank of Italy, and Draghi is in the same path from this point of view. Another important thing is that Draghi has also many international contacts and European relation, and this is also important in basically being the president and representing the nation abroad. These two characteristics are extremely important, and I don't think there are any other candidate with this high profile in a way. Also, this idea of neutrality in a way is really an asset, especially when the president gets involved in government formation or in the dissolution of parliament, or when they vetoed some piece of legislation that is important for the government agenda. So in all these sphere of powers, the neutrality of the president is something that is important. And
can I go to Brunello, if I may? And I'm going to ask our production team to perhaps put some of these points up on screen, because it's said when times are tough, a president is more important than when a country is running along extremely stably. He has the power to appoint the prime minister. We've been over that. To approve the cabinet, to sign laws. He has to sign laws. He can dissolve parliament. He's responsible for Italy's relationship with Europe. Could it be, Brunello, that he wants to be president, not just to exercise these powers, but because he sees rocky times ahead? And if he becomes president, he's got 7 years in which to bring some kind of calm to the country.
I think so. And that's actually my own and my company's opinion, in the sense that, in a normative sense rather than a positive sense, we think that Draghi should become president exactly for that reason, bringing 7 years of stability with the right man in the right position that can oversee the implementation of the reform plan that has been approved by Parliament and government. Clearly, the day-to-day management will be in the hands of the Prime Minister, who's still a very powerful figure, of course, but in this fragmented political system, the president guarantees the continuity of the political action and the unity of the country. And therefore, I think, as you said, as together with his personal ambition, there's the genuine desire to serve the country in the best possible way.
Lorenzo, once again, you are the money expert. I'm sure both our other guests today know a great deal about it, but you've worked at the Italian Treasury. This 200 billion euro fund that could, probably will, be coming Italy's way because of the good economic management that there's been over the last 12 months. What kind of plan? Can you loosely describe what it is and how it will benefit Italy?
Well, I think it's a massive plan, as you described, partly formed of grants and the other part of loans at a low interest rate, so effectively subsidized loans. So it's a massive amount. It's about investment, but it's also about reforms. And indeed, the current government has put reforms first, and it is delivering. Now, I think there is always a way to criticize the current performance, because we can actually see that most of the steps that were expected by the end of last year were actually formal steps, legal steps, and what really matters is implementation, and we haven't yet seen it. So I think there are many reform initiatives that have been initiated, but are still, still at their
Well, do you want to
infancy,
tell
if
us
you wish.
particularly about some reforms, those that you consider to be the most important or perhaps the most controversial?
Well, the welfare reform is quite important following such a pandemic shock. The tax reform has partly been introduced through the budget, but just a tiny bit. The rest is still to be done during the course of this year. And there are also other important reforms, such as the justice reform, which has already been approved by Parliament, but we are still waiting for the implementing decrees. And these are just examples. There are many others. And again, the real problem in Italy is not that of introducing reforms. It is that of implementing reforms, which was really the problem in the past. So that for that reasons, you would need a stable government for many years so that they can actually complete the job, which is a multi-year job.
Selena, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try and come into a situation of what if. And what if Draghi decides not to run for the presidency, or he doesn't win the presidency? Will Italy still be able to continue relatively serenely sailing towards a bright economic future, or is that the end of what seemed to be a rather wonderful time following a rather terrible time?
I don't know, but I think that probably if Draghi miss basically this presidential office, I think that he can, in a way, complete the job during this year until 2023. I don't think that any political party would like to drop out before the end of the legislature. And then we will see if we will find a stable government, a credible prime minister. I think that probably in the next future, we will find another solution. But for now, I think that it's important to have sort of continuity and until the end of the legislature. And for the presidency, I think that probably Berlusconi knows that he has no possibility to win basically the presidency. This is probably a political move to emphasize his role as kingmaker, and also the role of the center right in this election, because they have the numbers for the first time to have a central right president. So I think this is the actual landscape.
Okay, Brunello, can I ask you perhaps to try and wind this up? If Mario Draghi becomes president, it is a 7-year term. Does that mean it might end any ambition he has to become European Commission president, because Ursula von der Leyen's term runs out in 2024? Does it end that, because this would go way beyond that? Or is this job as president more important to him, perhaps, than being president of the European Commission?
There's no greater honor for any Italian individual to become president of the Republic. So if he's elected president, he will stay on for the 7-year term. So there's no discussion on whether he might later on become president of the Commission in a couple of years' time. There's not even the beginning of the discussion. If he doesn't make it to the presidency, as is possible, for a variety of reasons, then of course in a couple of years there might be a possibility for him to prove again to be an extremely important civil servant at national and international level and become president of the Commission, or somebody even says president of the combined Commission and Council. So they unify the two figures in order to provide some greater stability to the European Union as a construct, and also simplifying the governance, which at the moment is a bit fragmented as well. So, Draghi is a very resourceful person. He's considered a resource for Italy and Europe, and therefore I'm sure his talent will be used very well either in the Italian context or the European context.
A man who's been at the centre of the European project for many years and looks destined to be there for many more years to come in whatever capacity. Thank you very much indeed, Lorenzo, Selina and Brunello. And my thanks to you, wherever you're watching this edition of Roundtable. I'm David Foster. We'll see you next time, I hope. Until then, goodbye.